It is a pleasure and an honor to be here tonight at this event, which I took part at Kent State last year. I was invited to give a keynote lecture at the Constitution Day event at the library, of course online. I was here in Florence, of course celebrating the American Constitution. You all know that it was signed on September 17, 1787, and today I was curious enough to check the internet and to see, trying to understand and getting the meaning of Constitution Day. And I saw that the Constitution Day appears in many states and countries and is part of a lot of political, let's say, democratic institutions, the Indian one, and so on and so forth. Tonight, Davide Lombardo, professor of political science here at Kent State University Florence, will give a lecture on the Italian Constitution, which is a very young constitution, which was signed in 1948. So the title would be The Italian Constitution in its International Context, and we'll try to combine and to see the comparisons between our Constitution and the American Constitution at the light and in honor of the idea of democracy. Davide Lombardo.
So, first of all, it's a pleasure speaking here. Thanks, Fabrizio, for the introduction and for the invitation to do this. I am also happy to talk, to respond to you, because, there is nothing more complicated than medieval constitutions. Medieval constitutions are the thing most complicated in the world. So today we are talking about modern constitution, and they are relatively less complicated than the one that Fabrizio is a specialist about. Also, preparing this work, let me say that I try to exactly prepare it, focusing on the Italian Constitution, but with, always keeping in mind the background of our students. So I will make reference to the American Constitution for the little that I understand, but I completely welcome it. Actually, would be very, that would be the best thing that you, answer or say I should add something about this, because for sure you know about this more than I do. So, and I use the official translation of the Italian Constitution in English, which is given by the Senate of the Italian Republic, so I will use that text. So here is an overview of things that I will talk about today. I highlighted the last point because that's the most important. However, I will go through the parliamentary system, how that fits into the general map and the Italian constraint at the time, the international map of political system, and then we'll do the analytical look, which is based on a work which I did 3 or 4 years ago for a collection of essays in which I made an article about the Italian Constitution, one little section. Okay, so let's start. So the Italian Constitution, so it starts from 1946, the Constitution is 1948, but the constitutional settlement starts in 1946 when, with a referendum, Italy changes, from being a kingdom into being a republic, and this is the beginning, of a transformation. At that point, the mandate to the Constitutional Assembly is going not only to write a new constitution, but to write a new republican constitution, because the people have chosen, the Italian people has chosen via vote to be a republic. So, one of the main points in relation to exactly the US audience, that we are, is to explain that Italy is a republic, but like most republics in the European continent, and actually almost all also of the kingdoms, the monarchies, it's a parliamentary republic. So here I mark, but you'll read these things again and again, because I know these things don't get absorbed in just one slide. So it's a parliamentary republic. A parliamentary republic means there is no presidential, if we take a point of departure, which is the American one. A presidential republic is one when you elect directly the president, and the president is the supreme power of the republic. In the parliamentary republic, the supreme power is the parliament, that is the legislative body, and that's what people elect. Okay? So it's something that creates, this differentiation creates a number of other differentiations in the way the two systems work. These are two systems, political systems, institutional systems that because you choose to elect one or the other as supreme power, you have a series of differentiation. For instance, the separation of politics from the republic institutions. So you vote for a president, which is prime minister, and is also, let's say, the chief executive. So the president of the republic of the United States is also the prime minister, and he is a political. So you politicize the republic. Okay. Instead, a parliamentary system tends to keep politics away from the head, from the institutions. And this is one of the differentiations in between the two systems. Okay, so the parliamentary system, and I'm not at all pretending to be able to say this is better, it's absolutely, there are good advantages and problems in both systems. And then another thing is that, generally speaking, check and balance function differently. Because in the presidential system, you don't vote only for the president, but you vote also for the legislative. And this creates two powers that conflict each other. This is the basis of the institutional guarantees that is embedded in the American system, in that case, the presidential. In an institutional system, when you vote only for one thing, the balance of power cannot be made out of conflicts because there is only one supreme power. But you need to create a different system of check and balances, which is based more on the equilibrium between various forces that can check on each other, rather than on the outright conflict that you have embedded. I very much like the conflict, institutional conflict as a way to create guarantees, but let's say the other system works as well. Here is a scheme that I made myself, and so you can see it's pretty bad. But let's say citizen vote, parliamentary supreme power. The republic, the parliament is the one responsible for the prime minister, which is then something else, and the parliament is also the one that votes for the president of the republic. Okay. And the president of the republic is also somehow involved in the question of prime ministership. Okay. And this is part of the check and balances, because the president is not just like a king, just ceremonial. The king of Spain, the king of the queen of the Netherlands, or the king or the king presently of the UK. We are so used to say the queen. But let's say has also a role in the system. And this is the difference between these. And then you have the constitution, which is like the Supreme Court, is part of the check and balance. So you see, it's a system in which you have only one supreme power. If I had to make the same scheme, which I didn't, for the US Republic or for the Presidential Republic, you would have two things. Here, one is the president and one is the legislative. Questions? Okay, you can interrupt. So here is again the same stuff repeated and repeated, just to make sure that via the various slides you get some of this stuff in. The supreme power of the state is the legislative. This is another element, unitary federal. So countries can be unitary in the sense that there is a center to govern, and the usual example of this is France, or they can be federal, like Germany, or the United States, or the Russian Federation. These are all federations, in which you have a number of, let's say, elements within the country which have a high degree of autonomy. In the case of the United States, the states of the United. Italy is, from the beginning, a unitary republic, like France, but over the course of the last 60 years, 70 years, has evolved towards a form of federalism, with the regions having more and more power. Okay. Okay. The key point, again, I repeat, is this, let's say, the fact that while in the presidential system, the executive, that is the president, is supreme and autonomous from the legislative, so that there is a conflict, in the parliamentary system, the prime minister, the president is outside, because he's kind of a king. The prime minister is under the parliament, because the parliament is the supreme, which makes a completely different connection between those powers in the system. So this is an interesting slide that I found in an Indian from India, website about the two systems, parliamentary and presidential. They take the UK system, and that's very interesting. This is why I propose it here. They take the UK system on the left as an example of parliamentary, and the presidential using the US as the model. I added on the left and on the right my own sort of points, but you can see here, for instance, prime minister can dissolve the parliament. This is because in taking the UK as the point of departure, it's not the president, the head of state, who can dissolve the parliament, but is the prime minister in the case of the UK. If you come to Italy, the same system basically has a president, and the power of dissolving the legislative is of the president of the republic and not of the queen, because let's say the president of the republic is part of the system and is not outside, as in the case of a monarchy. So this is, let's say, this is a key point, that in modern time, unlike, let's say, in medieval or modern Europe, what you have is that whether you have a king or you have a republic, really, it doesn't matter. It's the same. It's just something that is left from the past, but the substance of the political system is decided by something else. And the fact that you have a monarchy or you have a republic is indifferent. And this is something that, if you go back only 100 years, is not the case. But now it's like this. And this is one of the important things that I think students from the US nowadays can take out of this lecture, because this is something that, in my experience, students from the US, and even students in Italy, don't have it clear. Because we are so full of monarchy, republic, that it's difficult to think that it doesn't matter anymore. Okay, so quickly, this is just the current top position in the Italian Republic. So this is the president, who is not the person who runs the country. This is kind of the king of Italy, has no, is kind of the figurehead of the republic. Is the person who represents Italy at the international level. He talks for the entire country, but has no political role. It's interesting that one of those little differences, this is not a little difference, with the presidential system is that while the president, the Speaker of the House, are political figures in the presidential system, in the parliamentary system, they become apolitical. So, the President of the Republic, the President of the Senate, and the President of the Chamber of Deputies in Italy are non-political figures. That is, that if you get, while the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, is she still here? Yes. Maybe not. Maybe has changed for a Republican. I can't remember anymore at the moment. But that's it. It's not important. The Speaker of the House in the United States is the head of the political delegation of the major party in the Congress. In Italy, the President of the Chamber of Deputies should step out of politics and cannot make a political speech, because it becomes a representative of Italy as, and the institution as kind of separate from politics and higher than politics. And this is one of the little differences, as I said, between the two systems which are important. This is the supreme power of the Republic is then the Parliament, which is currently made like this, with the clear majority made of the center-right, 3 parties, actually 4, but let's say 4 parties, with the opposition made of different groups, okay? So this is another difference which has nothing to do with the institutional system. It's about the electoral system, a multi-party system, a 2-party system, but this is an entire different lecture that I'm not doing today. Parliament, 2 chambers, elected every 5 years, 200 plus life senator, deputies 400. We have life senators. This is one of those old things remaining from the past. A little bit like life members of the Supreme Court. They are for life, for different reasons. That's completely different. But these kind of life appointments were more normal once upon a time. And they are still there. Okay, this is the current Prime Minister. She is the person who runs the country. The Prime Minister is the person who runs the country, but she is not elected by the people. She is the representative of the major party who won the election. And she is appointed by the President of the Republic, and she is basically approved by the Parliament, who is always the supreme power. That's the way the system works. So basically, she is the first female prime minister in the history of Italy, but she is basically subject to the approval of the Parliament, which is also, being the only power elected by the people, is the only one that is sober. Question? Yes. Yes.
So she is a member of the most prominent party of the parliament. Do I have that correct? Mm-hmm. Okay, so the parliament's built of the different parties you represented?
That's right. She's from the 119. Okay. But so she is the head of the major party that won the election the last time, and so the one that is most represented in the parliament, because mostly the elections are done via a proportional system, although corrected in a variety of ways.
And are the members of the parliament, are they elected individually and run individually on their own parties?
What do you mean individually?
How is it segregated into different sections? And how are they, like, is it 200 people running or 400 people
400
running?
people, yes.
Running on their own trying to get elected? Like, who are...
No, of course, yes. So that's complicated, but let's say. So you get elected via list, so you need to be proposed by a party. You can propose a party on your own, but let's say that probably is not going to work. So you are in a list proposed by a party, so you need to elbow your way within the party to get top of the list, and then depending on a variety of ways, you can be elected going down from the list. So if 10 people get elected, because this is a multi-person constituency, is not a single constituency. So it's different, completely different, the electoral system from yours. It really doesn't work at all in the same way. So multi-person constituency, multi-representative constituencies, and so if 10 people from your party, you need to be within those first 10. Or if the system includes the elector writes the name, then it depends on your personal votes. Now this depends on the exact form of the ballot. It's yes, but basically you cannot run on your own. Then when you are elected in the parliament, then you are a representative of the Italian people, and you can act as an individual, in the sense that if you want to say bye-bye to the party, using the party, and then change, you are free, because you are a representative and you have no obligation to stay and obey party line. You are completely sovereign to do as your conscience dictate.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Just switch it off, and yeah, perfect. Other questions? Yes, Daniel. Daniel, can you pass it to Daniel? All the way up. All the way up.
Is it on?
Yes.
That's it. So I saw in one of your earlier slides, you said Parliament decides who the Prime Minister is. What will happen if Parliament can't come to agreement on who the next Prime Minister will be? Who decides then?
So in the case of the, so I think it's what the British call hung Parliament. And in that case, where is it, that slide? In that case, what happens in the limit is that the President of the Republic, in the case of Italy, tries various options. So let's say that the head of the major party doesn't work. So the President of the Republic calls other people to try and see if they are able to get a majority of the votes. These can lead to, let's say, a different person that might get the agreement of the major party, but not the opposition of other parties and so on, so to try to find a majority within the parliament. Or, a case which in Italy happens from time to time, get a non-politician or somebody outside the parliament to create a majority which is kind of institutional majority of the president, that somehow sponsor and say, guys, you need to find an agreement. This is an authoritative person, and we make a government, which is, in the case of the Italian, is called technical government. This is something that doesn't happen that much elsewhere, but let's say it's a solution in those cases. Okay? Switch it off. Okay, so, okay, looking at the difference between, let's say, the parliamentary system and the presidential system, one of the important differences that emerge, that I haven't said, is that executive is subject to legislative, executive are member of the legislative, which means that usually the ministries and the personnel involved in the cabinet is members of the legislative, which creates usually one of the areas which is, let's say, may pose some problem, is this mixing of legislative and executive when you have a parliamentary system. Here, this problem is not there in the presidential system when you are the executive completely, let's say, independent, because it's a different power and is elected differently from and so they are subject to the president. And this creates a more neat distinction between executive and legislative. Of course, one of the, which is actually something in let's say, good. Let's say the good thing of the other system is that each of the ministries is then somebody who is elected and has that kind of legitimacy, while the personnel appointed by the president is appointed by the president. That's its it's totally dependent, has no any legitimacy outside that. Then they have their own legitimacy. But you see, let's say, how the two systems creates different system of dependencies, dependent, and so on. All right, so let's go further. Okay, so going back to the moment of creation, there are these, the Italian, as we are going to see, between 46 and 48 was a compromise between basically three ideological forces, which we're going to see later: the communist, well, the socialist, the Christian Catholic, and the liberal, let's say, tradition. Those are the two things. And in relation to the constraints that were there at the time of the creation of the Italian Republic and the Italian Constitution, these are the three foremost things. Italy was an aggressor and a defeated country, and as such was subject to very, very strong, let's say, terms of the defeat. No military sovereignty. This is the hardest one. Basically, the country has no autonomy in the military thing. The Navy was disbanded, the military was diminished, there is no right to create and develop weapons, so very, very hard stuff, all absolutely deserved by the Italian, but that was the situation. Second one, and those are the two, let's say, big treaties, they are going to be quoted again. Then there is Yalta. Italy falls under the US sphere of influence. This means that there are things that needs to be checked with the Americans before you go ahead. Thirdly, which we're going also to see, there is an international treaty which people often forget with the Vatican City, with the Vatican, the created Vatican. That is something that was there and needed to be adjusted in the constitutional setting of Italy. Okay, so there we go. We can jump this. So is it good to lose a war? So in a way, one good thing about completely being defeated, as it happened basically everywhere in Europe, even in countries that won, like France and Yugoslavia, to win the country, basically they were defeated. These are defeated even if they win. Italy is defeated. One of the good things about being defeated is that you need to start from scratch. And so you need to make a new constitution. So the constitution in 1948, Italy is the situation that is the situation. Just a look at, to finish up this before getting into there, this is the map of constitution. Sorry, I should have put this up. The order is not quite right. This is the constitutional settlement, and you see in blue the presidential republic, you see in orange the parliamentary system, you see in red the constitutional monarchies, and then there are the other system like the one-party system like in China. India is like Italy, a parliamentary system. You see here the map of Europe. If you put together the orange and the red, that is constitutional monarchies and parliamentary republic, you see that the entirety of Europe is parliamentary system. And actually, the only, so there are two exceptions, the semi-presidential republic of France, Ukraine, Russia, these are all, pardon, Ukraine, Russia, these are all semi-presidential republic, and then the only presidential republic that you find is Belarus. And this will open another thing with the difference between, let's say, formal constitution and actual constitution, of which the historians are very fond, but we are not talking about that at the moment. Okay? And Turkey is also a presidential republic, like the United States. This is also a very interesting map, one to keep in mind, but especially what I said. If you put together the red and the orange, basically you cover the entirety of Europe parliamentary system. Not all of them are equal, exactly the same, but monarchy and republic are basically the same. Okay, here we get to the main course of today, making a game about the first 11 articles, the fundamental principle of the Italian Republic, in which I made slides which, let's say, focus on a variety of things. In this first slide, I put there the first 4 articles there, and I highlighted with different where they come from. So, here you are, let's say, neutral text, like it's the duty of the Republic, but then in green, you have things like traditional liberal democratic text, like sovereign belonging to the people and it's exercised by the people in the form and within the limit of the Constitution. This is like absolutely liberal tradition, which you write that kind of things. Separation of powers, all of those things are of that kind, or all citizens are equal before the law without distinction. This is also the tradition. In gray, highlighted things that come from the socialists, the pressure of the socialists, like founded on labor. Italy is a democratic republic founded on labor. So, founded on labor, it's something that you would imagine you find, I don't know, in Romania after the conquest by the Soviet, after the occupation of the Soviet. Instead, you find it in Italy. This is because in creation of the various articles, the discussion among those constituencies, the Catholic, the religious, let's say the Catholic, the socialist and communist, and the liberal, very important presence, there was a negotiations which actually, in the case of the Italian text, is a very good compromise. That is, the compromise is made at a very, let's say, high level. It's just that it's very visible. And this is what is good about the Italian Constitution. Somehow you can recognize the various parts. So founded on labor, or to remove, no, what is it? Participation of all workers in the political. So that's really straight from a communist text. And you can actually read the Italian Constitution very clearly. In yellow, then I put there compromise. There are various kinds of compromise, but let's say, for instance, like this, fundamental duties of political, economic, and social solidarity be fulfilled. Duties is not exactly liberal tradition, it's more conservative thinking that goes with the Catholic as much as part of the liberal thing, but it's not exactly constitutional text, and duties, it's all there, if you see. But let's say economic socialist, socialist and Christians. Solidarity, I put in yellow, very important keywords that come from something. Solidarity is really the word where socialist tradition, Catholic tradition can come together with one word that is good for them, both. They don't mean the same thing, but they can agree on that word. So that is a key word in the text that you can recognize as the fruit of a compromise between those forces. So it's very interesting to make the reading a kind of philological reading of the text of the articles of the Italian Constitution, looking at the various contributions and how they found an agreement that actually, if you read it, looks very good. It's very consistent. It's a good constitution. It's a good liberal democratic constitution with all these little bits and pieces that come here and there, but they were actually written overall well. So you have these areas which are highlighted in light blue, they are like this: political, opinion, personal, and social condition, although this comes also from something else, full development of the human person, or contributes to the material or spiritual progress of society. This is very evident. Material, the social, spiritual, the Catholic, and they get together and they go on. Okay? I put in yellow some other stuff. I put in yellow some of the sources here, because solidarity is one, but human personality, social dignity, this is all coming from a very important document of the time. So the UN Charter of 1946 had just been approved. And at that time, we don't give a damn nowadays, but at that time, it was incredibly important. People looked at it really as the beginning of some sort of world, how do you say, governance, world governance. So the Italian constitution, which is written right there, I mean, just in the same months, actually, the UN Charter is already there when they start to work, has, let's say, quotes, basically. Human personality and social dignity comes from this to reaffirm a faith in fundamental human rights, in the dignity and worth of the human person. So you see those keywords, human person, dignity, and so on, are all there, the word worth as well. So they are kind of inspired by these things. Or in the case of, and I'll go, have equal social dignity and are equal before the law without distinction of sex, race, language, religion, we have two sources here, which were actually not just sources of inspiration, but these were obligation, because these were, let's say, things that the Italian had to sign without having to say yes or no, because that was a peace treaty. And so victorious country didn't ask Italy to sign. No, this is the peace treaty. That's it, you need to obey. In those documents, both the Instrument of Surrender of 1943 and the Peace Treaty of 1947, there are indications for those things. Okay. Race, sex, language, and religion in the Peace Treaty and public opinion. Race, color, creed, political opinion in the case of the Instrument of Surrender. So these are the sources of something. The Italians don't know about this. That this comes from the peace treaty in 1947. They think that we invented it, but actually, no, it's actually, you find it in all constitutions in Europe, but because most countries were defeated, they had to go to the peace treaty, and there are those things over there. Okay, so this was the thing. Then in the next slides, I'm going to do a focus on certain points regarding mostly minority, as I said in my second slide, minorities and non-discrimination. And telling you things that are behind. Let's say that I'm taking this opportunity, instead of doing what usually you do in this occasion, and I would do that as well if it wasn't, let's say, in this kind of safe zone, a defense of the letters of the Italian Constitution, here I can relax and point at things that might not be exactly, let's say, perfect after 78 years. Like this one, minorities and language. So, Article 6, the Republic safeguard linguistic minority by means of appropriate measure. Fantastic, okay? Safeguarding linguistic minorities. But actually, if you study, as I did 2-3 years ago, the background of this, you discover that linguistic minorities were privileged also to exclude other minorities. They are not there. We are not talking about ethnic minorities, we're not talking about racial minorities, we're not talking about other forms of minority that might be there in societies, and they are not there. So this is great about linguistic minorities, but actually is a form in which you privilege one form of minority, and you might, and what about the others? So this is the result of one commission, very important in the creation of the Constitution. It's called the 40 Commission, the work between 45 basically and 47, in which there are no national minorities because Italy is just a national country. Although there were the German minority, which is a linguistic minority, but actually they are Austrians. They don't think of themselves as Italian. And this, or no ethnic minority, because they might coincide, and actually the 40 Commission use ethnicity as kind of word to include the other, so to take it out. No racial minority, because the word race is, in any case, not scientific, dubious, so we don't use race. And no religious minority, because we treat it somewhere else. So this is extremely good because we have a protection of minorities, but it's only about linguistic minorities. Okay, so let's say if one had the possibility of having, again, extremely worthy people writing a constitution, this would be an area. Of course, I would be completely against any revision because the political personnel is not absolutely up to being able to better the text. They would only destroy it. So it's better to keep it like this. But let's say if we were in the possibilities of doing something, here would be something to be corrected or updated. Religious. This is interesting, but I'm going to go relatively quickly on this. The state and the, so we have two articles. So we have already seen in Article 3 that there is religion here, okay? Equal race, sex, language, religion. This comes from there, and religion is already a non-discrimination, okay? But then, and this is Article 3. Then Article 7 and 8 talks about religion. But it doesn't talk about religion in terms of religious freedom, like the, is it the First Amendment or the Second? The first, thank you. The First Amendment of the US Constitution. In that case, is about religious freedom. Here is not about religious freedom. This is something else. So, Article 7 is about the special relationship between Italy and the Vatican. But which is not only the Vatican, but is also the Church. So, these are two different things. The Vatican is the country. And Italy has an obligation to deal with that country because there is an international treaty in 1929 that creates the country. But then that same international treaty gives special status to the Catholic Church in Italy. And that international treaty is integrated into the Italian Constitution, it says it there. The relations are regulated by the Lateran Pact, which is this international treaty. Now, what can you do? The international treaty is there. Can you reform it? No. So you integrate, and then you say, okay, one day we'll do it. That happened in 1984, the reform of that treaty between the Vatican and Italy concerning also the status of the Catholic Church in Italy. And then you have the other denomination. But again, this is not about the let's say, religious freedom. This is about the fact that those are also, they are all equal between, in front of the law. But of course, we have just learned that these people have a little bit of a privilege. So Article 8 is a little bit with some problem if you read it together. It says everybody is equal before the law, but the article before said, well, we have this treaty there. What can we do? Okay. The other thing is that other religions, which are absolutely in the same status legally from the point of view of the law, but there is no a word about, let's say, there is no acknowledgement that there might be religious minorities and then they need to be somehow safeguarded. And there can be somehow. It's in the Article 3, but it's not repeated here. This is something which is good from a certain point of view because repeating things might create confusion between articles, but also is something that reflects, let's say, the uneasiness about the other religion from the Catholics and so on, the kind of places that they wanted to put them. Okay. Article 11, international organization and limitation of sovereignty, war. This is the article where the tone gets very high, and Italian constitution somehow wants to make a statement. We are very progressive. We are looking forward in time to a new era. A country defeated, a country aggressed, make a statement, say, no, we are really changing our path. And so it's interesting, the official translation, this is the official translation, say rejects, but actually the original word, the original word is repudiates, which is much stronger than just rejects. So it's really something very high, and the message given to in that sense. So repudiates war as an instrument for international disputes, and not only does that, but says we are ready to limit sovereignty if it serves peace and justice among the nations. This is extremely, I looked at other constitutions, most constitutions don't have anything like this. So advanced in terms of what the country is ready to do in order to foster international cooperation. So this is, in 1946, is a very huge step forward taken at the time. One can say many things. It's clearly, again, one of the sources is the UN Charter. The UN Charter, which clearly was a source of inspiration, and clearly the point of this article is going with the UN Charter and its spirit, but at the same time make a statement goes beyond, to kind of restate, because you need to think that Italy, as a defeated country, in 1947, was looked as a pariah in the international community. So making something like that was saying, no, we want to get back with the other in the UN. Okay, we're getting to the last part of this lecture, my focus on the principle of non-discrimination. Principle of non-discrimination is something that, as we have seen, was included in the instrument of surrender and the instrument of things just heard. So this is the clause 1, Article 3, clause 1. We have already seen it, and I've already spoken about it, but I'm going back from this final part. Principle of non-discrimination. All citizens are equal, so have equal social dignity and are equal before the law without distinction of sex, race, language, religion, political opinion, personal and social condition. Just to give you an idea of how much more specific this is than the early form of constitution, I put there the US Constitution Amendment 14, which is the base for the equal thing, of what in the United States function for that, which is the Equal Protection Clause, which was introduced in 1868 after the Civil War in order to safeguard former slave and black people. So to avoid that kind of discrimination after the end of the Civil War. If you look at this, you see this part here: deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. So it's very general, doesn't specify. There is another amendment that specifies about end of slavery and so on. Doesn't specify, and over the course of the last 150 years, basically the Supreme Court had to make interpretations that expand this equal protection to other categories, plus identifying also the black people. And because, let's say, under this, I give you the historical example that is always given, you create a separate school for African Americans, we would say nowadays, you gave them the equal protection of the law. There is no discrimination under a certain interpretation of this clause. The Supreme Court had to go through a number of things in order to make sure that that is not legitimate. So you see that, as always, the things evolve, as you'll see also. So here are the sources of, as I said already, race, color, creed, or political opinion. This is the instruments of render. This is the Paris Peace Treaty 47. Race, sex, language, or religion. Interestingly, you see, if we had time, I would ask you, notice that sex and race have exchanged position in the Italian Constitution. Sex, race, language, religion, and then political opinion. The second thing is that between the instruments of render and the peace treaty, color has disappeared. And creed has been substituted by religion. Now, I try to investigate why is that. I don't know. It's interesting that it disappeared. Well, first of all, the first is only about Italy. The second is the one that is used throughout the peace treaty, which is not just about Italy, it's about the entirety of Europe. But color disappeared because somehow Europe is all white at that time. And race is, of course, thinking about the Jews at the time, is not thinking about the black. So covers that, and no one is thinking about let's say, colored Europe, as the social reality of that is basically non-existing. I checked and I found that the 15th Amendment, I think, 1870, had race color. So there is a tradition in the American system from which that comes, because basically it's the Americans who write that, about putting those two close to each other. Questions? Yeah, anyway.
I actually have quite a few questions, if it's okay if I ask them all.
Let's see, but don't expect that I'm able to answer them all, or is the case. Go ahead.
Okay, so the first one I have is, does Italy today have sovereignty over its own military, or is that still in place? And if it is still in place, why? And if it's not still in place, what happened to allow them to regain sovereignty over their military?
And ask the second.
Ask the second question?
Yeah.
I noticed in your slide that said Italy rejects or outlaws the act of war. It specified a war of aggression. What is deemed a war of aggression? Well, Italy's a part of NATO, and NATO has Article 5. If another NATO country is attacked and they invoke Article 5, would Italy be allowed to join that war? Or because Italy wasn't directly attacked, would that be defined as an aggressive war under the Italian constitution?
Mm-hmm. Okay, I'll answer those two. Maybe the other ones, no? For at the end, keep them. So military sovereignty, basically very, very small. There is a treaty between Italy and the US in 1954 that instated the situation with the US military bases in Italy. Most of that treaty is actually secret. The secret provision that very few Italians have seen, but it has a big effect when people who have, let's say, fancy ideas get into the become Ministry of Defense, or Ministry of Foreign Affairs. After a few days, they become much quieter because they've been shown those clauses which are secret. So we don't know what is written in those secret clauses of the treaty between Italy and US. In relation to the second one, war of aggression, it's a case in which, for instance, in 1991, for the Iraq war, there was the aggression to Kuwait, there was the military alliance to go against Iraq because of the aggression to Kuwait. In that case, Italy sent contingent am I right? Yes, to Iraq to participate. in 2003, it was much more controversial. In the end, they did, but it was much more controversial because the case to go in Iraq in 2003 was much, and as we know, was basically groundless. But let's say that's another thing. But basically, there was much weaker point about going to Iraq in 2003, and so it was much more controversial adjusting to Article 11 in relation to the war to Iraq in 2003. So there isn't an issue about that.
In response to my first question, you said we don't know the exact details of Italy's military sovereignty. Do we at least know if at the end of the war they were required to cut down their military and cut down their military?
Yes, you can. That is written in the peace treaty of 1947. The navy was basically dismantled, and the actual ships were taken here and there by other countries. The military was reduced. France asked 20 kilometers. So there are a bunch of details, yes.
Did that stuff ever get overturned like it did with Germany, or is that stuff still in place today?
So let's say a zone of no military installation near France, I think is still in place, but it's hardly an issue. But let's say now Italy has one aircraft carrier, the Cavour. È una corazzata, no, an aircraft carrier. Yes, they are the F-35 inside. But that is a recent development. So things are evolving, but let's say, yes. Let's go to the last section. Really, so this is my last slide. Always on the principle of non-discrimination, in which, after having looked at the American Constitution, the sources in terms of how that transferred into the these texts which were obligatory, we look at the Republic of Italy, Article 8, and I look at a constitution which is more recent, and how that principle of non-discrimination has evolved since 1948 to nowadays. So one of the things that I want to point out, so in the Constitution of Italy, you have all citizens, and then you have the non-discrimination clause. There are 7 dimensions: sex, race, language, religion, political opinion, personal and social condition, okay? One of the problems with that thing, which comes from a variety of things, is, and most Italians don't know, all citizens. So what about you? You're no citizens of Italy. I can't discriminate on the race, and I'm not a poet, and that's fine. Of course, American students are quite protected by other things, but let's say that question is that many kids of immigrants in Italy don't have citizenship, are not protected by that. So people always look at the non-discrimination clause, but they don't see that only regards Italian citizens. Now, this is one of those things, like the American Supreme Court had to intervene in the Equal Protection Clause of 1868. You need to, and the Italian Supreme Court, which is the Constitutional Court, had to say, no, but look, there is Article 2 that has the human rights, and those apply to everybody. You need to read those two together, so that protection is given also to, let's say, people on the basis of this. But let's say there is one little thing in which, let's say, creates problem, because at that time, those people thought of Italy only being inhabited by Italians, as it was the case because Italians were migrating away, nobody was coming in. 8 years down the road, things have changed, and now we have a little problem with the onset of the article, because it's only about Italian citizens. It would be better to have written something else. By the way, in the article, in here, you are very good. All persons under Italian jurisdiction is much better. So if we had taken the text of the peace treaty, would have been, let's say, clear that it applies to everybody that is in Italy. But let's say, this is the things with constitution, the whole constitution of the world. But I want to end with looking at the Republic of Zambia. Zambia had a constitution in 1991 which went under revision and, let's say, clarification in 2016. So it's written with one of the most recent constitution updating the various things. If we focus on the principle of non-discrimination, which I made this kind of focus on the lecture today, you see here that in the 1991 version, in Article 11, Fundamental Rights and Freedom, every person in Zambia, not the citizen, every person in Zambia. So that has been somehow saying, okay, our non-discrimination clause needs to be for everybody. But you have his, it's slip there, thinking about male as the general subject, and then you have race, place of origin, political opinion, color, creed, sex, marital status, and you have 8 dimensions. So 7 here, 8 here. But it's also interesting the list, because you have like place of origin, color. Okay, interesting. It's interesting, in 2016, they added a bunch of things in Article 266, which is definitions. And you have a number of things like gender is defined by, even if gender is not there. But you have one of the things is discrimination, means, and they have 19 dimensions. Birth, race, sex, origin, color, age, disability, religion, conscience, belief, culture, language, tribe, pregnancy, health, marital, ethnic, social, economic status. So this is the way the constitutional, let's say, tradition is evolving by adding words into the principle of non-discrimination. And I'm sure that if you look at this, and this would be my the way in which I'd like to end this class, you can suggest something that is missing for the next constitutional round of creation. Any suggestion? Gender, which is, yeah, there, gender. Sexual preference. Anything else? We would probably add body shape nowadays. So it's interesting how the principle of non-discrimination, of course, there is always the problem that as you increase, it's more complicated. But let's say it's interesting the evolution, no? From not saying anything to saying it to okay. Thank you so much.
Grazie, Davide. So, of course, now we open the discussion. Should we have any question? I have one. Probably actually 2, because totally different, one to the other. But the first one goes straight to what you have said now, using the example of Zambia. Do you think that it would be positive for this country to rephrase part of the constitution? I'm thinking about the idea of citizens, no? So all citizens of Italy, all those who are in Italy. But this can be or represent a risk in terms of reopening a discussion which could lead into uncharted territories, the country itself first, even if it could be ideal to have something changed by the idea of citizens, because it goes like the idea of the immigration. Also in Italy, now we have what the Romans were used to having, the jus sanguinis. So, while in the US you have the jus soli. So it means that if you were born in a country, you should be citizen of that country. But there's a long discussion here in Italy now. And if we open that kind of, vaso di Pandora, it would
exactly, Pandora's
something.
box.
Yeah,
Yes.
and this is the first question.
Okay, so my answer to that question is I completely agree. We don't have a political personnel who is able to do that well. So it's the Pandora's box of political pettiness And so it's better to keep Article 3 like it is at the moment, unfortunately, and that knowing all of these problems, and people who should know, I mean, the constitutionalist people, judges and things, know that there is this issue, and there is a question of the status of foreigners, and there is the question, and foreigners are kids in school. No. So we have, in relation then to ius sanguinis, ius soli, I personally think, and this is my opinion, that the focus on that in the political debate is actually a way to polarize political attention of the people, but actually it doesn't make that much of a difference for the individual migrant. So the left wing who is pushing for the ius soli, okay, we can have the ius soli, but the migrant from Zambia will not have protection of his immigrant status by the ius soli. So the question is looking at things without, let's say, making something which is good in the newspaper and good when you make a speech, but then actually leave the migrant who is picking up tomatoes in Puglia completely without any protection. So I personally, I would like to go a little bit further than that kind of discussion, and somehow not forgetting that migrants need to have a protection, and clearly the discussion ius sanguinis, ius soli is completely bypass that issue. That would be my question. Second question? No?
Second question goes backwards to what you were saying before, and goes on the division of the world in different kind of political systems. So we have seen that the world is mostly red and orange, if I'm correct.
At least in Europe.
Sorry?
At least in Europe.
At least in Europe. And constitutional monarchy and parliamentary republics. Okay, so the question is the following. You were mentioning, I'm a Renaissance historian by trade, so the difference between monarchies and republics in the 12th, 13th, 14th, and 1500s was enormous.
Enormous.
Why? Because the king was, in other words, embodying the spirit of power, because he had both legislative as well as the executive powers in his hands. Jurisdiction. Nowadays, I'm thinking about Mattarella, the president of Italy, or the king of England, the UK, or the king of the Netherlands or Spain. What kind of role do they have except the, let's say, the representative kind of spirit of the country? Or are they guarantors of the system itself? And what kind of weight do they have in terms of launching a new law in these countries? Do they have this kind of power or not?
So I'm not very good at answering that. I had lots of conversation about the UK, and basically my British friend, they say that discussion is completely pointless. There is no role. No role of the monarchy in the political matters of the country. They are there. The only thing in which they have a role is if Scotland secede from the UK. At that point, there is a constitutional question, because, let's say, as Canada, they can keep the Queen or the King, the monarchy, and they can become a separate country. But let's say there is that question about what happens. Different if the Scotland becomes a republic, then it's something else. So there is an issue there, but only at that level. At political level, there is nothing. In relation to Spain, of course, we both know that in Spain, it's the king who brought democracy, who restored democracy to the country. So the monarchy has a very high moral standing in that country, because it's the institution who brought democracy to Spain. So there is a moral authority of the monarchy, which is there. From the institutional point of view, not much, I think. Not much. But I'm not advanced in relation to that. Go.
So I heard earlier you were talking about how changes should be brought to the Italian constitution, that got me thinking it's very difficult, if not impossible, to change the American constitution. Is it easier to change the Italian constitution, or is it very difficult, if not impossible, to change the Italian one as well?
Well, so you need to lose a war. As I said, you need to lose a war to change a constitution from scratch. To make amendments, addition, change a constitution is possible. Italy is a good case. The previous constitution before this one was relatively easy to change. You need just to pass a vote in the parliament, you could change the constitution. These allowed, for instance, fascism to become a regime without changing the constitution, because the constitution was relatively easy to amend. So, constitution needs to be relatively difficult to amend because it's civil stuff. So it's right that it's not easy to change. Or at least it has a strong sense. If it is not right, maybe right is excessive word, but it has a strong sense that you shouldn't be able to change the constitution easily. In Italy, there has been several changes of the constitution which have done. You need the parliament to vote exactly the same text at 2 rounds, at 3 months distance, and then there needs to be something else. And in certain cases, you need to have also a confirmative referendum or something like that. So it's a complicated procedures. There is and there is, of course, a constitutional check and so on. We have had an important constitutional change in the late 70s when regional power was instituted. It was there since the beginning, but not been instituted. There was a reform del Titolo Quinto that instituted that. That is one of the major reforms that has been in Italy about the constitution. So there has been reform of the constitution. But then let's say another conversation is the fact that you have change in constitution even if the constitution remains. So the US example that is the most obvious is you have a constitution in 1776 and then it's clear that the constitution changes after the Civil War. The country changes, it's another country. There is a constitutional change. The constitution remains the same, but it's another constitution. The basis for the country are completely other ones. So you have a change of constitution. The same has happened to Italy, to Italy. You have a constitution in 1946, which is made by communists, this and that, and so on, in that form, but in the 1990s, with the coming of the European Union becoming something serious, you basically change the way Italy functions altogether, becomes another country. We call it Second Republic, even if it is an exaggerated way, but it mirrors the fact that there is a change in the actual constitution, even if you don't change the constitution. So there are constitutional changes which happen without the constitution change.
I was just wondering who was in charge of writing the Constitution after the war.
In Italy?
In Italy.
So there was an election made in June 1946, which was for basically electing a constitutional assembly as much as a kind of parliament. So there was basically then this body, which was a constitutional assembly, which was working to write the constitution. So it worked in separate commissions that were working on some subsection of the text on the basis of other works like the one that I quote, the 40 Commission that was working on minorities and was working on discrimination and so producing a work of study on how the constitution should be set. Plus, you have these commissions. The work are all there, accessible on the internet. You have the minutes of the speeches made by each of the people in the commission, in sub-commission, Then there was a general debate in 1947, which approved article by article among the approvals. And for instance, Article 3 in the original proposal arrived as Article 7 and then was approved after a debate, which was a lot about should we keep the word race, should we not, because the Jewish community in Italy had asked to take out the word race from the Constitution. So the Constitutional Assembly in its whole debated the text as it was proposed by the Commission, approved the Article 7 in its form, but changed it into Article 3. So, and that's the way it goes, and then gets approved and becomes, let's say, law the 1st of January 1948.
So, I remember that you said after the Yalta conference, it was agreed upon that Italy would fall under the American sphere of influence. Why was America, especially given how they were going through, if not on the verge of going through, a second Red Scare, why were they okay with there being socialistic ideas put into the Italian constitution?
Very good question. So, first of all, okay, so it's a complicated thing. Italy basically was, the Italian resistance was made 80% by communists. Communists had a high moral ground because they were the ones who fought against the fascists and the Nazis in Italy. It was also a very big party. They got 25% or 30% at the election in 1946. So, the Americans made sure that they would be kicked out of cabinet in 1947, reducing their access to level of power. In the meantime, however, they were elected and were participating in the constitution. So, the thing is that the Italian constitution is not a socialist constitution, not at all. It's a liberal democratic constitution. It's just only those words that I give a little bit of place to the presence in Italy. Italy was the country with the largest communist party in the West, to that important presence in Italy, but in the end they didn't have any actual real power. And that was all scam for the Americans, is the hard stuff, no the, let's say, the hard stuff means liberal democratic constitution, free elections, military bases, all the important things were there. Then the communists had workers, labor, that's okay. It's not decisive. In the end, the Americans wouldn't go that far as to block, or to what extent they would go to block. It's only if things become serious. This is what I would say. Please ask.
So thank you very much, Davide, for this presentation, and thanks you guys for being here at this Constitution Day discussion at Kent State University Florence. Thank you very much. Ciao.